Imagine you had a wheel set on a central axis and you needed to turn it in a clockwise manner, very much like what we have here. Now, you could set up one person on one side of the wheel to push it in a clockwise manner, but you'd be doubly helped if you set up another person on the other part of the wheel pushing in a clockwise manner as well. Now, if you take the wheel away and you just look at what's going on top down, it looks like these two forces are actually acting against each other. Notice how they're going in opposite directions. But because of the way a wheel works, these are actually supporting and helping one another. This is called opponent processing, when you have two mechanisms that work against each other but are actually helping each other by virtue of the fact that they're working against one another. A similar example in the human body of opponent processing is the human arm. The bicep and the tricep are opponent processes. They actually work against each other. But if you were all bicep and no tricep, that wouldn't be very good. And if you were all tricep and no bicep, that wouldn't be very good either. The opponent processing actually helps the arm to work correctly. But here's the question I want to ask you. If I was to remove the wheel in the center, delete it entirely, and I was to shift this picture from 2 dimensions into 1 dimension, what would this actually look like? Well, what you would get is this. You would get 2 forces that look like they're acting against one another. Because you've taken one of the dimensions out, you have actually led to 2 forces that are in opposition to one another. We have plenty of examples of this in our society and culture. So when it comes to politics, we often talk about individual identity. And one force from one side of the equation loves to emphasize the individual. After all, this person is what matters. That person, that person. However, there's another group of politicians that like to emphasize group identity. It's not so much this person or that person that matters, the individual, but instead what matters is the groups to which that individual belongs. And in a one-dimensional world, these two act in opposition to one another. Here's a very important concept for us to understand. When dimensions are removed, opponent processing looks like tribalism. You have to understand this, because so much of what our world is doing in terms of its tribalistic fights is opponent processing on a reduced dimension. That's all that's happening here. This is actually a perennial issue in philosophy. I could just as easily map the questions of the one and the many right on top of these individual political battles. Is it all the individuals that matter and their individual interaction in society? Or is it the group that matters? The one, the singularity that matters the most? Again, opponent processing, when a dimension is removed, looks like tribalism. If we want to scroll down and look at this, we can actually map this onto many philosophical issues that have come down to us through the ages. Okay, so we can talk about this theologically. When we're talking about God's transcendence, we're talking about the fact that he is one. But God is also immanent, and that is over here under the many. And many religious systems like to emphasize God's transcendence, and many religious systems like to emphasize God's immanence. When it comes to philosophy, we also have 2 different approaches here. We have nominalism, which emphasizes the many, i.e. nominalism just names things because it's the particulars that all that matter. There's no forms, there's no transcendence to everything. But on the opposite side of the equation, we have idealism. No, the form is all that there is. Everything is one. Have you ever heard anyone talk about the fact that everything is one and matter in reality is merely an illusion? Idealism. They're getting rid of the particulars in favor of the universals. Oh, speaking of which, let's go ahead and put that on here. The particulars are the many. We can go back to Plato and Aristotle and argue about the particulars versus the universals. Where's the realm of forms, and how does the realm of forms interact with us? Again, the problem of the one and the many. In some systems emphasize the particulars, and other systems emphasize the universals. Or we can take this into the realm of knowledge. Induction is primarily done through science, and science is done through the many. We look at the particulars, we do experiments, we arrive at knowledge ground up, bottom up. and deduction occupies the other side. We argue top down. We argue from first principles down to below. I think, therefore I am. And that's deductive reasoning. And you guys know I love Pajot's language. We're just going to map this onto heaven and earth. Of course, earth is the many and the one is heaven. Okay, we've got our symbolic categories of heaven and earth, and these map right on top of one another. Now, the thing I want you to see here is that this tribalism is perpetuated by virtue of the fact that both of these systems devolve into reductionism. What is reductionism? Reductionism seeks to say that everything can be reduced down to this one lens or this one way of looking at the world. So you can look at the world through the lens of the many or the particulars or induction, nominalism, immanence, or earth. But you have reduced. You are reductionistic in this way. Or you can look at the world through the lens of the one, transcendence, idealism, universals, deduction, heaven. And we map that lens and we say, this is the foundation bedrock of reality, and everything else can now be seen through this lens. I, as a Christian, reject reductionism in all of its forms, and it exists over here and it exists over here as well. We are not reductionists, but here's my problem. Protestants for a very long time have actually functioned as reductionists in their lives. They say they believe in God, they say they believe in heaven, but in reality, they live their lives in a reductionistic way. In this sense, they occupy the realm of the many. They just live down here amongst their many doctrines and their many rules. They erect a closed system out of which they can derive all of the doctrines of the faith through the Bible. And now that we've got our closed system, we are actually able to explain everything reductionistically. In this sense, fundamentalists are no different than new atheists because they both start from a reductionistic frame. Pragmatically, but still, it's reductionistic. What I think we need to be doing in Christian theology right now is embracing all of this holistically. This is actually done through realism, okay? Metaphysical realism. Now, some people might think that I'm trying to take the middle road when I reference realism, that I'm trying to navigate between two hard or difficult things, that I'm saying we don't want to be too extreme over here or too extreme over here, therefore realism. Not the case. This is not the kind of realism that I am advocating for. That would actually be simply another form of reductionism. Instead, I am advocating for realism from a both and perspective. What do I want to do? Let's add back in the second dimension. Rather than talking about everything one-dimensionally, I actually want to talk about everything from a two-dimensional frame. And realism helps us to occupy the space between the one and the many. It actually puts the one and the many together and helps us to navigate this space in a way that is consistent with both realities. This is not reductionistic because it occupies both spaces. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine, Father Hugh, and I'll put the link to our conversation down in the description below. And he taught me about a concept called hylomorphism. Hylomorphism says the one and the many are united. Okay, the forms and the particulars work together in a seamless way. If I can give an example of it, this is the best way I can try to illustrate it. Okay, form and matter come together in a single complex or composite. The particulars have the form built into them. All right. And so if I was to look at this form matter composite, think of it like a ball, top down, I would see the forms, truth, beauty, goodness, etc. This is the essence. All right. But if I was to look at the form matter composite bottom up, I would see the accident, the individual person. Okay. The whole point is that the form matter composite actually is a both and. It brings together in a unified way the one and the many. This is the heartbeat of realism, and I think that this is a thoroughly Christian way of looking at things. Part of the reason I'm going into this is I believe that metaphysics is something that is uniting a lot of different traditions right now. And a lot of people are still getting caught up in these debates that are reductionistic, trying to make everything reduce down to either the many or reduce down to the one. But I actually think that hurts us. Hear me clearly. Realism, properly apprehended, destroys tribalism. How so, you might ask? Well, I am not advocating for a realism position that somehow is a via media, a middle way between the one and the many. Instead, I am advocating for a realism position that subsumes the one and the many, because I refuse to argue on one-dimensional terms. Instead, we go into two dimensions, and the one and the many are all subsumed under the banner of realism. We get all of it at once. This means that I can read authors from the many camp and glean something from them. Why? Because I think the many is true. But I can also read authors from the one camp and glean something from them. Why? Because I think the one is true. I believe it's a both and because I'm a realist. And just because they haven't put all the puzzle pieces together in the same way as me doesn't mean I can't glean something from the very good work they've done on the specific puzzle piece they've been identifying. One of the things that you're going to find if you start viewing the world in this way is that not everybody is going to get it. I'll be reading a nominalist author. They have some great ideas, very thought-provoking. But somebody will come up to me and ask, what are you doing reading that nominalist? Aren't they an atheist? Yes, but I know where their ideas go. I'm not reading them for their atheism. I'm reading them for the other insight that they're bringing to me. I'll be reading an idealist. Somebody will approach me. What are you doing reading that idealist? Isn't their sexual ethics suspect? Again, I'm not reading them for their sexual ethics. I know where their ideas go, even if they don't. I understand the larger framework in which it might fit, even if they don't have that insight. I don't need them to understand the whole frame for them to understand a specific part of the frame and be able to give me some details about that. All your base are belong to us, and I can plunder all of these worldviews for the riches that they offer. Now I hear somebody saying, Morpheus, not everybody believes what you believe. My beliefs do not require them to. Let's go back to our wheel. What we have on our wheel is a battle between idealism and nominalism. Nominalism pushes one direction, all of the particulars, and idealism pushes the other direction, all of the forms. But guess what? Realism actually navigates in between these, not by arguing for a third position that is in contradistinction, but instead for arguing as the wheel itself upon which everything turns. By adding the second dimension, realism takes up idealism and nominalism under its wing, and it can say, all of this belongs to me. I can't think of any better, any more Christian metaphysical way of viewing the world. And it's this way of uniting everything that I believe falls firmly under the banner of Christ and under the banner of Trinitarian theology. We should be advocating for metaphysical realism. We should be allying ourselves with those who understand the world in a metaphysically realistic way. And we should continue to have conversations there. I can have my cake and eat it too with this system. I get to get everything. If I am reading the nominalists, I can glean from them. If I'm reading the idealists, I can glean from them. And if I'm reading the realists, I can glean from them as well. Truly, Christ is all and in all. And with two quotes from Adrian Pabst on the topic of metaphysics. First, he says this: his metaphysical realism seems consonant with his Trinitarian theology. This video is not meant to go in-depth into metaphysics. I probably went deeper than I wanted to go already, but it's meant to help you see the both-and nature of reality. You, as a Christian, don't have to live tribalistically. You do not have to live in an either-or world. You can live in a both-and world fully subsumed under Christ. 100% man, 100% God. The hypostatic union is the model for metaphysical realism. Towards the end of the book, Adrian Pabst says this. He says, metaphysical realism that views being and God as the transcendental reality in which everything participates. That's our path going forward. Now, you don't have to understand all of this background, but I want you to know there are good, metaphysical, grounded reasons to believe the Bible, to believe in God, to believe in Christianity, and to follow Jesus with your life. We are on sure footing, and guess what? We can plunder the treasures of every tradition out there. We just have to know where they go. If you are reading an Eastern tradition that seems to reduce everything to the one, no problem. Go ahead and plunder their riches and bring it under the category of the one, knowing that the many is real also. There you have it, guys. My view on how we should move forward understanding metaphysics. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you want to see something similar. Take care. God bless. Bye.